It was made very, very clear that all of the attractions there were not for us. That was for, underprivileged children and children that were terminally ill that couldn't go to like Disneyland.
Michael Jackson's daughter, Paris Jackson, exposes the truth and what she saw behind closed doors. For years, the world thought it knew what life was like inside Michael Jackson's Neverland. People imagined a little girl waking up in a giant mansion, walking outside and finding a private amusement park waiting for her. Ferris wheels, animals, movie theaters, everything a child could dream of. But Paris Jackson says that picture was wrong. In a recent Call Her Daddy interview, Paris revealed that she didn't actually grow up at Neverland the way people believed. She spent only the first few years of her life there. And instead of spending every day riding attractions, she woke up and went to school. Even more surprising, Paris said the famous rides and animals were not meant for her and her brothers. They were mainly there for children who were underprivileged or seriously ill. So what was Michael Jackson really like behind the gates? What rules did Paris and her brothers have to follow? And why does Paris still describe her father as her best friend, despite everything the world has said about him?
Today, we're going beyond the famous pictures and the headlines to look at Paris Jackson's own account of the childhood almost everyone thought they understood. Let's get into it. The Neverland everyone thought they knew. Neverland was never an ordinary home. Michael Jackson bought the huge California property in the late 1980s and turned it into something that looked almost impossible. There was an amusement park, there was a zoo, there was a movie theater, there were animals, rides, and even a train system. To people looking from the outside, it seemed like the perfect childhood playground. And when people heard that Michael Jackson's children lived there, it was easy to create a story in your head. You might imagine Paris, Prince, and Bee spending their mornings riding roller coasters and their afternoons playing with animals. But Paris recently pushed back against that image. During her interview with Alex Cooper, she made something very clear. She did not grow up at Neverland. She said she was there only during the first few years of her life. That one statement changes the picture dramatically.
Because the public had spent years connecting Paris Jackson with Neverland, as if the ranch had been the center of her entire childhood. According to Paris, it wasn't. Her childhood was much more complicated, and surprisingly, much more ordinary. She woke up, she went to school, she did her homework, she had chores, and she followed rules. That might sound normal, but remember where she was living. Most children had to dream about going to an amusement park. Paris had one sitting right outside. And yet, according to her, she couldn't simply walk outside and ride whatever she wanted. There was a reason for that, and that reason tells us a lot about the way Michael Jackson raised his children. The rule that changed everything. Imagine being a child and having a private amusement park near your home. Now imagine being told, you can't use it whenever you want. That was apparently the rule in Paris Jackson's childhood. Paris explained that her father made it very clear that the attractions at Neverland were not simply there for his own children. They were meant largely for children who were less fortunate, including children who were seriously ill and might not otherwise get experiences like a trip to Disneyland. That meant Paris and her brothers had to earn their fun. If they behaved well, if they completed their chores, if they finished their homework, then they might be allowed to enjoy some of the attractions on the weekend. That is a very different picture from the one many people imagined. The rides weren't simply their personal playground. They were a reward. And the same idea followed the children even when they left Neverland. Paris described this as a pattern that continued throughout her childhood. The message was simple. Do what you're supposed to do first. Then you can have fun. Even television had rules. Paris explained that watching TV or movies was not simply something the children could do whenever they wanted. Entertainment could be limited unless it was part of schoolwork or something they had earned. So behind one of the most famous celebrity homes in the world, Paris says there was a childhood built around structure. School first, chores first, responsibilities first. Fun came afterward. And that makes the story much more interesting, because the child living next to a Ferris wheel wasn't necessarily the child riding it every day. What Paris actually did all day. So what did a normal day look like? According to Paris, it was surprisingly simple. She was homeschooled. She explained that she would wake up and go to a room inside the estate that had been turned into a classroom. Then school would begin. There were no normal school buses,
No walking into a large public school building, no ordinary classroom filled with dozens of students. Instead, her classroom was inside the same enormous property that the outside world viewed as a fantasy land. That must have created a strange contrast. Outside the classroom were attractions that most children would have considered unbelievable. Inside the classroom was school, math, reading, lessons, homework, the normal things children have to do. And according to Paris, that routine continued even after the family moved away from Neverland. The family moved frequently, and she described periods when they would not stay in one place for very long. But the basic rules stayed. Do your work, do your chores, behave.
Then earn your reward. That detail is important because it shows that Neverland wasn't necessarily the center of the parenting system. The rules were. Michael's children may have lived in extraordinary places, but Paris describes their daily expectations as fairly ordinary. And there was another unusual part of growing up as Michael Jackson's child: privacy. The masks, the fame, and a childhood no one could see. Being Michael Jackson's child came with something most children could never understand. Almost everyone wanted to see you. Fans wanted pictures, photographers wanted pictures, the media wanted pictures, and even a simple trip outside could become a public event. Paris explained that she and her brothers sometimes wore masks in public when they were young. To outsiders, those masks became famous images. People wondered why Michael Jackson covered his children's faces. But from Paris's perspective, there was a simple reason. Her father wanted his children to have some privacy. He wanted them to be able to go outside without everyone immediately knowing who they were. Think about how strange that must have been. A child could go to a normal place like a store or an amusement park.
But she couldn't simply be another child. She was Michael Jackson's daughter. Everywhere she went, that name came with her. So the masks helped create a small barrier between Paris and the public. For a while, they could go out without everyone staring. They could experience small pieces of normal life. And that tells us something important. Michael Jackson's children may have lived an extraordinary life, but Paris's recent comments suggest her father was also trying, in his own way, to give them some sense of normal childhood. The world saw the fame. Paris remembers the father, and those are not always the same thing. What Paris says Michael was really like as a father. This may be the part that surprises people the most, because after years of public discussion about Michael Jackson, Paris could have described her father in many different ways. Instead, she described him warmly. When asked about Michael, Paris said he was a funny guy. She also described him as her best friend. That doesn't erase the complicated history surrounding Michael Jackson. It doesn't tell everyone what they should believe about him. It simply tells us how Paris remembers her own relationship with her father. And that distinction matters. A daughter can remember a parent differently from the public. The public sees headlines. A child sees the person who wakes them up, the person who jokes with them, the person who sets rules, the person they call dad. Paris has made it clear that her relationship with Michael is personal. She doesn't believe the entire world needs to understand every part of it. And perhaps that's why her recent comments are so interesting. She isn't trying to recreate Neverland as some perfect fantasy. She's giving people a glimpse into what her own experience was like. And that experience wasn't simply luxury. It included rules. It included privacy, it included school, and it included a father she remembers with love. The day Paris lost her father, then everything changed. In 2009, Michael Jackson died. Paris was only 11 years old, and suddenly, the private grief of one child became something watched by millions of people around the world. At Michael's memorial service, Paris walked onto the stage and spoke about her father. It became one of the most emotional moments of the entire event. But according to Paris, it wasn't carefully planned. It happened in the moment. She later explained that she felt someone needed to say something, and when neither of her brothers stepped forward, she did. An 11-year-old girl stood in front of a massive audience and tried to say goodbye to her father. The world saw a famous moment. Paris experienced a deeply personal one, and years later, she has said that she still hasn't gone back to watch the footage. That detail says a lot, because for everyone else, it is a video. For Paris, it is a memory. There is a difference. The audience can watch it again. The internet can replay it. People can discuss it. But Paris has to remember what it felt like to be that little girl standing there, and that is something only she can truly understand. The part of Neverland people never saw.
The strange thing about Neverland is that the public knew almost everything about the property, except what it actually felt like to live there as one of Michael Jackson's children. People knew about the rides.
They knew about the animals. They knew about the huge estate. They knew about Michael Jackson. But Paris says the daily experience was much less glamorous. She wasn't spending every morning at the amusement park. She was going to class. She wasn't automatically allowed to watch whatever she wanted. There were rules. She wasn't automatically allowed to ride the attractions. She had to earn that privilege. And the attractions themselves were not designed simply for the Jackson children. Paris said they were intended for children who were less fortunate and children who were seriously ill. That EW.com. That completely changes the meaning of the property, because what looked from the outside like a giant playground for one famous family was, according to Paris's memories, also a place created to give special experiences to children who normally couldn't have them. That doesn't make every part of Neverland simple. It doesn't erase the controversies connected to the property, and it doesn't mean everyone will look at Michael Jackson's legacy in the same way, but it does add another side to a story that has been repeated for decades, and perhaps that's what Paris was really trying to explain.
She wasn't asking people to forget what they knew. She was asking them to understand that there was more to the story. The woman Paris is today. Paris Jackson is no longer the little girl people remember from 2009. She's now an adult building a life that belongs to her. She has pursued music. She has spoken openly about her struggles. She has talked about relationships, sobriety, grief, and growing up under one of the biggest names in entertainment history. And she has made something clear. She doesn't want her entire identity to be based on being Michael Jackson's daughter. That's part of her story, but it isn't the whole story. Her recent interview shows that she is willing to talk about the past when she chooses to, but she also wants to move forward. That may be the biggest change of all. When Paris was a child, other people told her story for her. Magazines told people what her childhood looked like. Photographs created an image. Headlines created another, and the public filled in the rest. Now she is old enough to tell the story herself, and her version is much more complicated. It has rules.